I know you're struggling with those little freelance gigs, so I'm giving you a chance to feel useful. My Aunt Cynthia didn't hug me when I walked in. She just shoved a heavy silver tray of champagne into my hands. Take this and serve the guests, she said, loud enough for the caterers to hear. Don't just stand there. You look so unemployed. My knuckles turned white against the cold metal. I wasn't here to be a waitress. I was here because she needed my notary seal for her bank papers. But I didn't argue. I didn't scream that I secretly owned the multi-million-dollar company that just hired her son. I just took the tray. If she wanted to treat me like the help, I'd let her. It was the perfect cover for the trap I was about to spring. I moved through the crowd, a ghost in my own family's garden. A man in a navy suit snatched a glass from my tray, without making eye contact. I recognized him. He was a local banker I'd negotiated with last quarter. He didn't see Vanessa, the CEO of Helios Logistics, who had walked away from his high-interest loan offer. He only saw a woman in sensible shoes holding a tray. It was almost funny. They were all here to celebrate Brandon's new vice president position, toasting a salary that I personally approved. My company, Helios, is valued at $15 million. I built it from a laptop in a studio apartment into a supply chain juggernaut. But to Cynthia and Brandon, I was just the cousin who dabbled in online work. They never looked deeper. They Googled Vanessa and found nothing, so they stopped looking. If they had checked the state business registry, they would have seen that Helios is a subsidiary of VM Holdings Group. My arrogance was my shield. Their arrogance was my camouflage. I offered a glass to Cynthia. She was holding court near the fountain, laughing too loudly. Brandon is going to save this family, she told a neighbor, clutching her pearls like a lifeline. I knew the truth behind that desperation. 30 minutes ago, she hadn't just asked me to serve drinks. She had forced me to notarize a deed of trust. She wasn't just celebrating. She was refinancing. I'd seen the papers. Cynthia was drowning. The villa, the cars, the parties, it was all funded by bridge loans and credit she couldn't service. The sharks were calling every hour. She needed Brandon's 6-figure salary not for his future, but to stop the bank from seizing her past. She was leveraging her home, betting the roof over her head that Brandon would succeed. It wasn't maternal love. It was a frantic, narcissistic investment. I walked toward the kitchen to refill the tray. The noise of the party faded into a dull roar behind me. Most people would have screamed by now. They would have thrown the tray down and listed their assets just to see the shock on their aunt's face. But I stayed quiet. Real power doesn't need to scream. It just needs to sign the checks. Let them laugh. Let them think they're winning. When the enemy is busy bragging, they don't look at the fine print. My silence wasn't weakness. It was the sound of a predator waiting for the perfect shot. 2 weeks ago, my HR director flagged a resume. Vanessa, she said. You might want to see this. It's family. I opened the file. Brandon's name was at the top, bold and centered. He was applying to be the vice president of business development. The salary was $120,000 a year, plus bonuses. Enough to solve all of Cynthia's debt problems. Instead of deleting the application, I made a call to a forensic accounting firm I use for vetting high-level hires. I told them to dig. 3 days later, a courier dropped a heavy red dossier on my desk. I opened it and stared at the anatomy of a fraud. The first page was a letter from the Harvard Extension School registrar. Brandon's resume claimed a master's in supply chain management. The registrar confirmed he had attended a single 2-week seminar on Introduction to Logistics and then withdrew. He didn't have a degree. He had a receipt for a deposit. The second section was worse. The forensic team had audited his sales records from his previous job at a mid-sized shipping firm. They found a pattern. Every quarter, Brandon authorized payments to a vendor called Apex Solutions. Apex Solutions was a shell company registered to his college roommate's apartment. Over 2 years, $45,000 had been funneled out as consulting fees, kickbacks. He wasn't just incompetent, he was a thief. I closed the folder. A normal CEO would have blacklisted him. But I wasn't just a CEO. I was the cousin he'd mocked for 10 years. I decided to give him exactly what he wanted. I drafted a conditional offer of employment. It looked standard, full of corporate jargon and benefit packages. But attached to the back were 2 lethal documents. The first was a federal affidavit of truth. Since Helios handles government contracts, every executive must swear under penalty of perjury that their background is clean. If he signed it while hiding the kickbacks and the fake degree, he would be committing a federal felony. The second was the indemnity bond. The VP role required a $500,000 security bond to cover liability. I knew Brandon didn't have $500, let alone $500,000. The contract stated that if he couldn't put up cash, he could provide a guarantor with real estate assets. I sent the packet. Then I waited. I knew exactly what would happen. Brandon would run to Cynthia. He would show her the salary, the lifeline she desperately needed to pay off the sharks. She wouldn't read the risk assessment. She wouldn't ask why a logistics firm needed a $500,000 bond. She would only see the vice president title and the cash flow. Cynthia isn't investing in her son. She's investing in her own survival. That desperation makes her blind. She sees Brandon as an extension of herself. A brand to be marketed, not a person to be vetted. She signed the deed to her villa as collateral because her arrogance wouldn't allow her to believe her golden boy could fail. She literally bet the roof over her head on a lie. I looked down at my leather satchel sitting on the kitchen counter. The red dossier was inside, heavy and final. It contained the proof of the kickbacks, the letter from Harvard, and the signed bond Cynthia had mailed back yesterday. They thought those papers were a ticket to the high life. In reality, they were a confession and a foreclosure notice. The sun dipped below the tree line, casting long, bloody shadows across the manicured lawn. The party had shifted from polite conversation to loud, slurry celebration. Cynthia stood on the patio steps, clapping her hands for attention. Everyone. Before we cut the cake, Brandon and I are going to step into the library for a private signing ceremony. We want to make this official before the sun goes down. The guests cheered. Brandon adjusted his silk tie, looking like he owned the world. He spotted me near the beverage station and jogged over, his face flushed with adrenaline and expensive scotch. "Hey, Nessie," he said, leaning in close. His breath smelled of oak and arrogance. "Make sure you bring a fresh bottle to the library. The vintage stuff. I want to toast the second the ink dries. And try to look happy for me. Okay? Jealousy gives you wrinkles." I looked at him. A man standing on a trapdoor, demanding a better view. "I'll be right there, Brandon," I said. I wouldn't miss it. He winked and strutted toward the house. I watched him go. Then I turned my back on the champagne. I walked into the kitchen, picked up my leather satchel, and felt the weight of the red dossier inside. It was heavier than a bottle of wine, and much more intoxicating. I walked down the hallway. The noise of the party faded, replaced by the ticking of the grandfather clock. I pushed open the double doors to the library. The room smelled of old paper and unearned wealth. Cynthia was already there, adjusting the desk lamp to get the perfect lighting for her Facebook photo. Brandon sat in the heavy oak chair, holding a fountain pen like it was a scepter. They looked like royalty preparing to decree a new tax. I set the stack of papers on the desk. I had buried the lethal documents, the affidavit of truth and the indemnity confirmation inside a mountain of boring, standard HR forms. Health insurance options, non-disclosure agreements, tax withholding sheets. "Okay," I said, checking my watch. "We're on a tight schedule. The caterers are holding the cake, and I need to file the digital timestamp within 10 minutes or the offer expires. Just sign the tabs marked in yellow." I didn't give them time to read. I flipped the pages for them. Sign here. Initial here. Date here. Cynthia didn't look at the text. She was too busy making sure her diamond bracelet was visible for the camera. Brandon didn't read the clauses. He was too busy practicing his signature. They signed the federal affidavit swearing he had never committed fraud. They signed the bond confirmation linking the house to his conduct. They signed away their lives because they couldn't be bothered to read the fine print. "Done," Brandon said, flourishing the pen. "Now, where is that champagne?" I gathered the papers. I pulled out my notary stamp. Thud. The sound was loud in the quiet room. The trap was armed. I walked back to the double doors. I didn't open them. I turned the heavy brass lock. Click. The sound echoed. Cynthia looked up, annoyed. "Vanessa? What are you doing?" "I told you to bring the wine." I turned to face them. My posture changed. I wasn't the niece in the sensible shoes anymore. "Sit down, Cynthia," I said. Brandon laughed. A sharp, barking sound that grated against the quiet of the library. He leaned back in the oak chair, twirling the pen between his fingers. "You can't talk to my mother like that," he sneered. "Who do you think you are?" "You're a notary, Vanessa. A glorified secretary with a stamp. Now unlock the door and get the champagne, before I tell HR to revoke your clearance." I didn't answer. I walked past him to the desk. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single rectangular piece of heavy cardstock. It was matte black with gold embossing. I placed it gently on the leather blotter, right next to the contract he had just signed. Brandon glanced at it. Then he stopped. He leaned in. "Vanessa Vance, founder and CEO, VM Holdings Group, DBA Helios Logistics." He blinked. He looked at the employment contract under his elbow. The logo at the top said, Helios Logistics. He looked back at the card. The connection fired in his brain like a short circuit. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by a vacuum of pure confusion. "You," he stammered. "You own V. M. Holdings? I do, I said, my voice level. You never looked past the DBA name, did you? You Googled Vanessa and found nothing. So you assumed I was nothing. Your arrogance was the only camouflage I needed. Cynthia stood up, her face flushing red. What is this nonsense? Is this a joke? Brandon, tell her to stop playing games. But Brandon wasn't listening to his mother. He was staring at me with the terrified realization of a man who just realized the floor he's standing on is made of glass. I own the company you applied to, I said. And 24 hours ago I ordered a forensic audit of your past. I opened the red dossier and laid out the evidence precisely. Exhibit A. $45,000 in kickbacks funneled through a shell company owned by your college roommate. Exhibit B. Confirmation from Harvard Extension School. You withdrew after 2 weeks. No master's degree. Just a deposit receipt. Then I held up the document he had just signed. Exhibit C. A federal affidavit declaring no history of fraud. Signed under oath. In front of witnesses. I leaned in. You didn't lie on a resume. You committed perjury. That's a felony. Cynthia tried to sweep the papers away. I slammed my hand down. Don't touch the evidence. She froze. I flipped to the final page, the indemnity bond she'd signed without reading. Cross-collateralization means your bond is tied to his conduct. Fraud triggers immediate default. I looked at Brandon. Already collapsing. Your son just triggered that default. The $500,000 bond is due today. She whispered she didn't have the money. I know, I said. That's why you pledged this house. I uploaded the notice of default to the county registry. Sent. The foreclosure process has begun. This property now belongs to VM Holdings. She stared at me in disbelief. You have 30 days before eviction, I added. I follow the law. Inside the room, Brandon sobbed. Cynthia hyperventilated, realizing she'd leveraged her life for a lie. You told me to be useful, I said quietly. I just taught you the difference between assets and liabilities. Brandon is a liability. I packed the dossier and left. Outside, the party continued, music, laughter, champagne, unaware that 2 lives had just ended. A black sedan waited. I got in. Headquarters? The driver asked. Yes. Take the scenic route. I blocked their numbers and powered off my phone. 6 months later, the villa sold at foreclosure. Cynthia downsized. Brandon works warehouse nights. Permanently barred from corporate roles due to perjury. I signed the promotion of a qualified executive with a clean record. Revenge isn't loud. It's precise.